we have the code to read in which type of object the user wants to create. And based on their input, we create a certain type of object. So let's just go, for example, let's create a base automobile. All right. I don't think this is, all right, it just says A is never used. Now, if I try to do this, I've never created a constructor that takes an integer in as a variable. So NetBeans is going to say, constructor automobile and class automobile cannot be applied to given types. Required is no arguments. What it found was an integer as an argument. That's going to be a compile time exception. That means you can try to run your program, right? And it's going to compile first after it downloads all the stuff. You start a new project, and it's going to say compilation error. So NetBeans warns you about these before you try to compile it. You can still try to run it, but you're going to get a compilation error. So that's why NetBeans is so helpful, and most IDEs are. You have JGrass. JGrass is a little bit different, but you have Eclipse, you have IntelliJ, Visual Studio. There are many different IDEs you can program in, and it depends on what programming language you're trying to program in as well, which IDE is most appropriate for them. So right now, my automobile class only has a default constructor, meaning no parameters. And if you remember, when you create a class, by default, if you don't put any other constructors in here, it has one built in. So if you notice, I never wrote the code for a default constructor, but it has it built in. Now, what it does, I'm not sure. I think it sets all my variables to some value, the default values. But as programmers, we like to provide a default constructor to make sure we know what our program is doing, what behavior is doing. Right? Now again, car extends automobile. Same with truck. Extends automobile. All right. So we create an automobile, A, and then we want to read in the value. So we need a scanner, input equals new scanner. We've done this plenty of times. So I have my automobile object here. I create a scanner object here. And I want to read in the different attributes for A. Now, many of you go string A equals new equals input dot next line. Then you go A dot set make to that variable. As you get better, and this is outside of what today's lecture is, but as you get better, you want to start stringing your code together. So if you see, this variable really is irrelevant outside of us passing it in as an attribute. So what we can do is just take input.next line, and some of you may have already done this, and put that in there. So what Java does, and what programming languages will do, yeah. This is the code I have. I have string make equals input.next line, and then A, which is my automobile, dot set make to that variable. All right, so I read in whatever make the user types in into a variable. Then for my automobile object, I set it to make equal to that variable. However, this variable is unnecessary because this code, we can just take and put it in here into these parentheses. And what Java will do is, it'll evaluate this first So it'll read the next line and immediately pass that into our method. So if you see, I just shortened our code a little bit by one line. However, as you all start creating more complex programs, the way you string these methods together can get more and more complex. And when you all start doing internships and working those six-figure jobs, you'll see this a lot, even much deeper than this. All right, so I want to get you all accustomed to seeing that as well. All right, do the same thing for model. A.set model. Input that next line. And if you all notice, in NetBeans, it highlights certain things with a red box. So what that is that's a method that takes parameter. When you type in your parameter, if you just hit enter, it goes to the end of the line. You don't have to type anything else. That's what that red box is. And then we can do the number of doors, A.set num doors. Again, we have to read in from the console, convert it, then pass it. So integer.parseInt, then we read in input.next line. You see, I just strung three methods together. We always start from inside. So starting here, we read in the next line, convert it to an integer, then store it as the number of doors. Is everybody following that? Any questions about that? No? All right, let's see what this does. Now, I don't have a toString method, so let me make one real quick. That override. Public string. R equals. So you just do turn Nate plus this Nate. Now I'm going to do a new line plus model. And before we leave today, I will be looking at your notes from the last couple of weeks. I know I told you all would look at it on Friday, but I'm going to look at them today with notes that you all have. So I encourage you all to write notes today. But I will be checking in again. And I got kind of slack on it, but all the while you still expected to take notes. And if you remember, the way the notes grade works, it's a range. So within 20 to 25 notes, or I think it's 100. 15 to 20, I believe is a 75. 10 to 15 is a 50. 5 to 10 is a 25. And 0 to 5 is a 0.
That's last time you looked at?
I have it on the spreadsheet. I have to look. All right. So I have my toString now. A real simple toString. This out system .out.println a.toString. Remember, when we're asking the user to do something, we want to prompt them as well. So system.out.println make. I'm going to do actually this. System.out.print model. I'm not using println. I'll show you the difference.
I would look at that. One of you just uses.
So it's just up to you. as a programmer, but I'll show you the difference. So it's going to be on the same line. So these two I'm using print, and this one I'm using print line. So you'll see the difference.
Is it also like backslash and
You said backslash here?
backslash and something like that, or like another next line or something?
Yes, if you're doing it as a string. So if you look at my automobile class, within my string, I use backslash in to put that stuff on the new line. Right here. Can you all see that? So within a string, you use backslash in. So if I wanted to print out and I want new lines in my whole string, I have a whole paragraph. And I want to put new lines somewhere, yeah, backslash in. Where at, over here? Yeah, I could do this. That would do the same thing as print.
It's like after you sit down that front, you go under.
So you don't necessarily have to do that because when the user types it in, they're going to hit enter. So it's going to go in a new line. So if you look down here, I can't scroll down any further, but make down here, it's asking for input on the same line. So if I put Ford, I hit enter, it's going to say model on the same line. Mustang. Now if I hit enter again, what you'll see is number of doors is going to print it out, but then it's going to expect the input on a new line. That's what print line does. If you see number of doors down there, now the input is on a new line, too. So that's the difference between using print and print line. You just have to be careful with print because if you're not specifying where those new lines are going, everything could end up on the same line. So I encourage all of you to use print line most of the time. It just depends on how you want your program to work. And then here you go, Chris. I use those new line characters here to put each one of these on the two string. This just all depends on how you want to manipulate your output. So I did system.out.print line here, and another new line to put two spaces. So make Ford, model, Mustang, number of doors, 2. You see it has 2 spaces now, details. Just so you all can see the difference between when I'm typing in and when it's printing it out. All right. So cool. Everybody know what I just did, right? That makes sense? Now, what you all did for your homework and for the lab was create an array list. Facebook? I'm pretty sure there are arrays and array lists in there. But all the data and content is stored on a database. So you would read in the information from the database into an array. An array of objects, and objects being users.
How many different, like, do you have?
How many different what?
Like, you know how we got so like how many of those different things do you have to do?
Like the different files and stuff. So it's interesting, when Facebook was first created, I think it was created in C++. It was one file. One file. Like thousands of lines of code.
I watched it last night again.
What, your social network? Yeah.
I seen some different files.
Yeah. So we created an array list, and we said, while true. That way it's going to run indefinitely. Right? That's my while loop right here. Oh, I don't have a break statement. System.out. What would you like to do? System dot out dot front line. Zero add. System dot out dot front line. One remove. System dot out dot front line. Two end. I'm going to say down here if choice equals 2, break the while loop. Choice equals integer, %, put that next line. I don't have an input. That's my scan. Oh, here we go. All right. Switch. Choice. Space 0. This stuff right here, that's the add. Space 1. Remove. So forth. You all should, this should look familiar to you. This is what you did for your lab and for your homework. Now, granted, how you accomplished it might be a little bit different than how I'm writing it now, but the logic still applies. So right here, I use a switch statement.
How do you know, or where did you find out when to use different things? So like, I just like my program is the same tool. If I wasn't working with you or like the tool or something, you gave me the instruction, I would not know when to put a switch, when to put a while, when to put an if, you know what I'm saying? Like, how you come to that, like,
Decision.
understanding.
Yeah. So if you don't know if a switch or an if statement is better, just use an if statement. All right. Switches, the only time you want to use a switch is if you have an integer. So right here, we're giving the user a choice between 3 different options. We know those 3 options. It's either 0, 1, or 2. And they're integer options. So the switch is more efficient for integers. Now, we said to the user, hey, do this. If you type a number over 2, then the program ends. Switches can't work for greater than or less than. So you would need to use an if statement. Also, just because I've used switches before, you can't put a break statement in a switch and break a while loop. All right, so I had to put that in an if statement. I just knew that this kind of trial and error. And a lot of my knowledge has come from trial and error. I work on projects. Not necessarily something it's not necessarily fun, but I enjoy doing it. I enjoy working on challenging problems. And by doing that, I've been able to build my skill set in programming. With anything, right? It just takes more practice. The while loops and the for loops. For loop, if you know that you're only going to loop through a certain number of times. Right? So if you're looping through an array, okay, an array has a size, for loop. And I want to know what the index is as I go along. For loop's built into a for loop. It starts from 0, goes all the way up, and you have the index the whole time. Same thing with an array list. Array lists have a size, although it can grow and shrink. When you loop through it, it's going to have a size. So a for loop is appropriate. A while loop is, you may not know when this, you don't know how many times you want it to loop. So for example, I don't know how many times the user is going to want to add or remove an object.
You just know that long is true.
Just keep going. Or if there's a condition. So again, if we said enter a number over 2 to end the program, I can say while choice is less than 2. And it will keep going. Once choice is greater than 2, it stops. You know, so while loops are really good for conditions. You may not know how many times you want to loop it, but you know there is a condition that stops it. For loops are really good if you know exactly, you may not know it, but you can get the size of the array and loop through exactly that time, that many times.
So there more, we got while loops, for loops, if statements, switches, is there more than that?
That's it.
That's it.
That's it.
Okay, cool.
There's nothing else in terms of, those are the fundamental structures. There's no more fundamental structures like that to learn except for what we're going to do today, which is how to deal with exceptions. They're called try and catches. All right. So we have our loop. You all remember case 0 was to add. Case 1 was to remove. I'm not going to do all that right now, but I'm going to say autos dot add a. All right, so I'm going to, right now I don't want to type out all the codes to add and remove, so I'm just going to have them the option to add. If I run this, oh, I didn't hear it. Down here, oh, there is no A this time. Sorry, I don't really need that. So I give them 3 options: 0, 1, or 2. My program wants to read in a number. It doesn't want to read in the character. But users being users, they're going to type something wrong, right? So we're going to take a 0Q. Whoops, I hit 0 and P at the same time. I hit run, our program is going to crash. I get a runtime exception.
So if you make the string or integer, like all about
Exactly. Now, if you were reading in a string, it would work. The strings, you can put anything. But in our program, we are explicitly trying to convert, oops, I didn't mean to do that again. We are explicitly trying to convert what the user types in into an integer. Well, you can't convert 0p into an integer. That makes no sense. So what happens is, we get a number format exception for input OP, or 0p. Right? Number format exception. It breaks our program. But you all know when you use an app, you make a mistake, you don't want your app to just crash on you every time. Although if you're playing certain games, it's like, because they didn't account for that type of exception. Right? You know, you're playing 2K and you throw the ball at the court and it crashes. Somehow, in the code somewhere, they didn't account for that type of exception. That's why it's important to send in your crash report. I don't have to do it, but you know, other people make the games better. All right. So we, as programmers, can check for this. It's using something called try, catch, and there's a finally clause. So what we can do is say, try to do this code. If not, catch this exception. So try to do this. If this exception is thrown, catch it and run this code instead. Okay? So here, we try to read this in. What do you think the key word is? Try. So Java is obvious with what the keywords are trying to do. If this is true, do this. Or else if, do this. Or all other scenarios, else, do this. While this is true, do this. For this many times, do this. It's pretty explicit. Switch between these numbers. Which one is true? Let's try. So we're going to try to read in this choice, and then we can catch number format exception yes. So what do we want to tell them? I got to have a closing bracket for my try. What do we want to tell the user? Our scenario, which is invalid input, numbers only. That's good. Cool. And then you see I have this error because this choice was declared inside the try. So I'm going to put int choice equals -1 up here. Now it is. So within a try statement, it's kind of like an if statement. If you declare a variable inside of it, you can't use it outside. And actually, we can actually declare choice above. So what's the issue with my code? Right now, what's the issue with it? So if they type in a 0p, it's going to read a 0p, it's going to throw off a number format exception. It's going to keep running this switch statement. We don't want that, right? We would want it to try to do this stuff. If anywhere in this code there's an exception, stop and reset. So how will we do that? Not necessarily reset. We would take all of this code and put it inside our try. So from the switch on down, put all of that in the code. So what happens is, at this point, let's say they type in a 0p. It throws that exception, and it immediately skips all of this and goes down to our catch. It goes to our catch, ends our catch, goes back to our while loop, and then starts over.
So, what happens? Number of exceptions.
So again, you can put anything into a string, right? And there are tons of different exceptions, which we'll uncover a little bit more as we learn about this on Wednesday. And number format exception is just the exception that's thrown when you try to put a string in for a number. There are other ones called input mismatch exception, unsupported operation exception, null pointer exception, meaning you have a variable, you try to use it, but it's null. So for example, let's say I have scanner input. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to declare instantiate it. So scanner input, and the cool thing about NetBeans is going to catch that before you even get there. So it hasn't been initialized, meaning we never created. So NetBeans won't even let you do that. You would have got a compile time exception. So if I run this now, add remove in user, oops, oh, I put a 0 and a O. Obviously that would have given us an exception before. This time around, invalid input, numbers only. What would you like to do? Now our code repeats. And so we've made our code more responsive, adaptive. Huh? 0, 0? Well, 0, 0 is just 0. So we would go to case 0. Well, 1 is just 1. So anything.
So it's not stupid.
Right. Right. Now, for let's say, now if I put a 10 in, there is no switch case for that. So it just skips over, there's nothing in the switch, I'm just going to go back to the top. Now, how do we make our program more responsive for that? So that's not an exception. There's nothing wrong with you putting a 10 in. But we don't have a case for that. What would be the case to check for that? If it's not a 0, it's not a 1, default. Default statement. Default. System.out. Line. Invalid input. This one only 1 or 0, 1 or 2. Now, granted, our switch doesn't work because if they put in a 2, it's going to say this, and then it's going to break our loop. So we actually need to check this if statement before the switch. Up here. That way, it breaks our loop before we even go into our switch. So you think, again, logically and programmatically, having our if statement below the switch works. Except what happens is, if I have the if statement down here, what will happen is, hit run, they want to end the program. They don't even want to do anything, they just want to end the program. It's going to say invalid input, only 0, 1, or 2, and then it's going to end. Right? Because in our switch, we have case 0, we have case 1, all other scenarios, type this out. And then it goes down to check if choice equals 2. But if we put this up above the switch, it doesn't even have the opportunity to do that. If I run this again, I type a 2, immediately ends. Remember, I had the system without details at the bottom. So again, as you all program, your code may work. It may compile, it may run. But does it work logically? Are there logical issues within your code? So we'll continue try catches next time. But in this class, for the most part, what we're going to use try catches is for this type of thing. The user is typing in some type of input that could potentially break your program. So when you do the Boolean, those of you who have Booleans, you're trying to read in your Boolean values. I don't know if it's number mismatch exception. It might be Boolean mismatch exception.
Yeah. Boolean, I agree.
Okay.
It's just like it's like partial. It's a during that partial.
Right.
Doing the string is just in that next line.
Yeah. I think Boolean.
It's like you gotta add a little bit more.
I believe it's Boolean dot parse Boolean and then input next line. The thing is, again, the user has to type the whole word true lowercase. What if they misspell it? Right. Do you want to start the whole thing over just because they misspelled true? You might want to have the user type in something else, just a T. You just check. Does this string dot start with T? Right. And so the user would type in a T or an F, and then you would read in that string dot equals, what I typically do in programming, you can lowercase it strings. So I lowercase it, does it equal a lowercase t? Does it equal a lowercase f? If it equals a lowercase t, whatever Boolean value I have equals true. If it equals a lowercase f, whatever Boolean value I have equals false. So I don't force the user to type in the full word because I can just translate that in my program. So as programmers, we want to make the user as dumb as possible. We want to restrict their choices to fit our program. T or F is really simple. Right? It's really hard for somebody to mess up T or F, but they can. Right? And let's say we have an automobile that has 50 different characteristics. If they mess up one, do we want to restart the entire prompt? Not necessarily. Right? Our current code does that. It restarts the entire prompt. So again, we have to look at how we can do that, make our code more responsive and dynamic for the user. All right?
So that last line that's print out, or is it not print line, the /n detail, we took that out. We didn't need it.
At the end, I don't have a display details method, so I don't have it.
We don't need it.
So, we're talking about try, catches, exceptions, all that good stuff. Does everybody remember the difference between a runtime and a compile time exception? See, this remote will come in handy.
The red underlined text, and then
Go ahead. And a runtime exception?
That's when you run the program and it won't give you the long list.
Right. So all this stuff I'm saying, it's kind of, you can kind of piecemeal what it means. When I say runtime, what does that mean? It means it occurs at runtime. When I say compile time, what do you think that means? It occurs at compile time. Everybody with me? Oh, okay. All right. Because I do want this to be more of a dialogue, not just a monologue.
Runtime is the long area. When your program,
Why? It occurs at runtime. Runtime exception occurs at runtime. What does compiling mean? We're going to basics now. These are basic terminologies that you all should know. What is compiling a program? What is compiling mean? Kind of, sort of. What does that mean? To be more specific. The reason I'm asking you all to be specific is because when you go on a technical interview, you're going to actually be specific. What does compiling the program mean? No, you just typing programming. Compiling means converting your code, whatever language you write in, into computer executable code, machine language. Essentially, of compiling or converting your code into machine executable instructions. For Java, those machine executable constructions are called Java bytecode. What is the machine called that all Java programs run on top of? It's a virtual machine. The JVM, Java Virtual Machine. All Java code runs on the JVM. Does everybody remember what a virtual machine is? Yeah. Anybody heard the term virtual machine or virtualization? We talked about it at the beginning of the semester. Remember, virtualization means abstracting the hardware, so basically virtualizing it. So I now have a virtual CPU, virtual processor, or virtual memory, virtual storage. And I can run different operating systems on top of my host operating system. So let's say, for example,
that wireless part on your phone,
yep.
you're talking about the phone.
Yeah. Why not invent it? Why not invent it? You said what? Could be you. Maybe a little bit more knowledge into electricity. Principles of electricity. I said the same thing about putting music inside of the device, a portable device. See where we are now. All right, so remember, we have a host operating system. For us, oftentimes, a lot of us use Windows. Okay? Most of us use Windows in this room, I believe, unless you have a Mac. You're using Mac OS, or for you really hardcore computer users, you're using Linux. right? A JVM, or even just simply a virtual machine. So again, our operating system runs on our hardware, right? This has our CPU, memory, et cetera, storage. Our host operating system runs on top of that. We can use a hypervisor, which basically virtualizes all of our hardware. The hypervisor virtualizes our hardware. So we have a virtual CPU, we have virtual memory. And then what we can do on top of here is run other operating systems. So I can run a Linux box, I can run another Windows machine, I can run a Mac OS machine, I can run whatever I want on top of that hypervisor. Right? And so that allows us to do many different things. When we connect to web servers, it's typically not a physical computer. It's a virtual machine on top of a physical server. And so we utilize more of the resources more efficiently on that server. Now, we talked about this at the beginning of the semester, so hopefully this should be reviewed. If not, I have videos out there. YouTube channel. All right. So what the JVM does, the JVM runs on top of our operating system. All right, the Java virtual machine, and it runs our Java programs. All right. So that's what happens with our Java program. When we compile it, the code that we write is compiled into Java bytecode, and the JVM takes that bytecode and runs all of your instructions. Now, for us, Java bytecode is not human readable. Right? So it makes more sense for us to code in Java, but the JVM actually runs the instructions in bytecode. That makes sense. There's a layer of translation. So our code is translated to what? Oh. It's translated or compiled into what? Yes, called Java bytecode. The JVM then runs what? It runs our Java bytecode. Right? So again, we have a Java program. It's compiled into Java bytecode, which is then run on top of our JVM. What does JVM stand for? Java Virtual Machine. Right? What does a virtual machine do? Or virtualize it virtualizes our hardware so that we can run other machines on top of our physical one. The hypervisor does it, correct. Correct. And the JVM is technically a hypervisor. It allows us to run Java programs. Yes. This again should be reviewed. This is the foundation of Java. Okay. You all got that? To recap, when we compile our program, what is it compiled into? Called? Correct. What runs our Java bytecode? Correct. Right, clear on. You all just learned a little bit more on the foundations of computing. What makes the JVM so unique, so in other programming languages like C++, it gets compiled. So when we have a program right here in C++, it gets compiled directly into machine executable code. There is no virtual machine. It gets compiled into the instructions that your physical hardware will run. right? Which means for whatever, and the thing that you all have to understand is physical hardware changes. Right? One processor is different than another processor. One processor takes a different set of instructions than another processor. So for whatever machines that you want to run your code on, you have to compile it with that hardware. So for example, let's say I want a program to work on both Mac and Linux. Right? I would have to compile two separate programs, one on Mac, one on Linux. The JVM, on the other hand, you just have to write your code once. The JVM is then responsible for translating what you write down here. Your program goes straight to the JVM. There's no other direct hardware connection. The JVM is then responsible for taking what you code and translating it for your physical hardware. So it makes our program more portable, because we don't care what hardware is underlying our JVM. From our perspective, the JVM provides a standard set of hardware that we program for. So that's the difference between Java and, let's say, C++. And you might learn about this in other classes. I just wanted to give you all an idea of it now. All right, back to what we're doing. So again, what is the difference between compile time and runtime exceptions? Essentially, it occurs during what? During runtime. Running the program. What does compile time exception mean? It occurs when? When you were trying to compile your code. Right. Compile time exceptions occur during compile time. Runtime exceptions occur during runtime. So compile time exceptions are really easy to identify because NetBeans typically does it. Now in C++, it doesn't. So you don't know you have a compile time exception until you try to compile, and then you have to go back, find out what on that specific line is wrong, and then try to compile it again, find out that you didn't fix it, then go back and try to fix it, and then compile, find out you still didn't fix it. So luckily for us, NetBeans and a lot of Java IDEs help you with that. What does IDE stand for? Integrated Development Environment. Basically, NetBeans is considered an IDE. Eclipse is considered an IDE. IntelliJ, C-Lion, Development Environment. Those are all IDEs. Right? That's what we code in a lot of times. We code in IDEs. Historically, see, this is how y'all have it good. Historically, exactly, you might have Notepad++. You might have this. This is how you would code everything. For a blank file, you have to know every step. Public class lecture 11, oh, no spaces. Public static void main creating args and the scanner input new scanner. System, yes. And then, oh crap, I need to import my scanner. You have to know exactly where it's at. Java utility scanner. This is how you code. Now we have IDEs, which takes a lot of this legwork out. All right. We have this. Makes it a lot easier for us. Increases productivity. Not sitting around just doing things over. All right. So any questions about what we did last time? The try catches and exceptions. Let's say you read it. But again, I told you all, this is not typically how I would do a Boolean. How I would do a Boolean would be system.out.println. Is this true? Or whatever the question is. Y/n. Then I would say if the string entered equals input dot next line. If entered dot to lowercase, I want to lowercase it just in case the user types in a capital Y. Dot starts with, that allows the user to type in the entire word yes. I'm just checking the first character. Starts with a Y. And actually, you're right, it should be double. Because it starts with is a string. Boolean yes equals true. Else if third dot to lowercase dot starts with an E, no, F or N. Boolean yes equals false. Else system.out.println invalid. That's how I typically would do a Boolean. Not reading in true or false because the user can misspell things. Just give them Y or N. And lowercase it to be safe. Starts with a Y, starts with an N. Okay? That's how I typically would do a Boolean. Okay. Good. Good. All right. So we give the user the choice to add or remove. I think here I add. Okay. Let's fill in our remove. So remember we need to loop through our array list for int I equals 0. I is less than, I think, autos dot size I plus system.out.println index plus dash plus autos dot get I dot get make space plus autos dot get I dot get model. Everybody knows what that line does, yes or no? This line right here, what this does. So the first thing it's going to print out is the index I, which starts at 0. Then it gets the automobile at index I. So if it's 0, the first automobile. Then it gets its make. Because we're getting an object, an automobile object, and then we're calling get make to get the make of that object. And the same thing here for model. And we're printing out all of that information into the system.out. Okay. So we have that, and then we want to ask to use your system, .out, .println, which automobile would you like to remove? So we're expecting the user to type in an index, int index equals integer .parseInt, and put .next line. All right. So we have it to where if the user types in an invalid number, right, something that's not a number, it's going to go down to our catch. Right? Invalid input, numbers only. So this catch is going to include all code that's in here between this bracket down here and the try bracket up here. So all this code is under protection, if you will, by this catch, number format exception. So if I type in something that's not a number, it'll catch it. It'll catch it here, it'll catch it here, and it'll catch it here, because everything is inside of our try.
So everything between the try and the catch.
Yes. It's going to be caught down here in this catch. So there's another condition. What if the user types a number outside of our array? Let's see what happens. Let's add Mustang 2 doors. All right, let's say I want to remove. It shows me my Ford Mustang. Which automobile would you like to remove? Or if the user again makes a mistake and they're like, oh, 5. So it's a 5, right? They accidentally typed the wrong button. What do you think is going to happen? Exception. One-time exception. Oh, well, I guess not. Well, that worked out. Oh, you know why? Okay, hold on. I know why. I didn't actually try to remove. Autos dot move index. All right, now let's do this again. I didn't actually put the code into remove. So add Ford. And then I'd say remove, and now go 05. I didn't actually try to remove it before, that's why it wasn't, didn't have an issue, it just kept going. But yes, runtime exception. What is that runtime exception? Index out of bounds exception. Index 5 is out of bounds for length 1. Meaning, our array list only has one object. How are you going to remove the 5th one if there's only one in there? And if you look at this long list of errors, you go down this list, you find the first one that relates to your code. It'll point you to the line that you messed up on, or that through the exception. So none of these are my code, java.base, java.base, java.base. But company.com.mycompany.lecture11 or lecture11.main is one of my files. So if I click this link, it takes me to the code or the line that gave me the issue. There's no index 5 in this array list. So what should we do? How can we protect our program from that type of behavior so that it just keeps going? It tells the user you made a mistake, and then it keeps going. While if, that won't protect against an exception. What can we use to protect against an exception? Exactly. Do we already have this code inside of a try? Yes, up here, right? Our catch only catches number format exception. Right? So obviously index out of bounds exception is not a number format exception. So what can we do? Add another catch. Catch index out of bounds exception. EX out.println no index for selected. I might as well index out of bounds exception. I think I might need to import it. That's what I'm saying. Index out of bounds exception. So now let's see what happens. Let's add make Ford Auto Mustang 2 doors. Now I want to remove. I'll type a 5 again. No index for selected auto. And it repeats itself. 1. Which auto would you like to remove? Well, I have one option, but I'm typing 8. Just because I like breaking programs. 8, again, no index for selected auto. Okay, let's try this again. Do 1. Again, I like breaking programs. See how responsive. I'm going to put 800. No index for selected auto. The 2 ends my program. I don't have a display details method, or else you would see all the details. So you can have multiple catches. Okay? You can have multiple catches in your program, depending on what is thrown. So you might not know the exceptions that can occur until you start testing your program. You're like, oh, dang, this exception just happened. Did I account for that? Or when you start doing your programs, try to think of ways how you can break it. If I type this in, does it crash the program? It's an exception. Well, what if I just, instead of typing what the programmer expects, let me just type something else. What happens? Does it crash my program? So same thing. If I want to add, I type Ford Mustang 2 doors. I want to remove. And you see that I accidentally hit another character right there. I hit a 1. That code is still protected. I hit it in. Code is still protected. I hit a 1 now. Which one would you like to move? I accidentally hit a W2. Invalid input, numbers only. Okay. Everything is in order. So invalid input numbers only happened because a number format exception was thrown before an index out of bounds exception. That makes sense? So try catches protect our code from exceptions that we can account for. There's also certain cases where you don't want to implement the behavior on how to catch an exception. So let's say you have a method. You have a method, automobile, let's see. Let's go to truck. Get bedlam, let's see. Set unnecessary tailgate. Let's say unnecessary tailgate. If that's false, so not, except. Exception. Oh. What is that? Oh, okay, never mind. When you want to throw an exception, you have to put the keyword throws, whatever type of exception, and then, let's see, what's the issue? Let's see. I'm going to look at how to throw. So even I look up how to do things. There we go. Okay, all right. So I got to create an object. So throw new exception. I don't know if I need this keyword. So you have to say this throws an exception, right? And so let's say if unnecessary tailgate is false, we want to throw an exception. Hey, there was an issue. We are declaring when an exception is thrown, right? So if I go back to my lecture 11, let's say instead of automobile, we want to make a truck. So truck, T equals new truck. System, front line, is the tailgate. All right, and then again, how do we do this? I like to do it Y or N. String tailgate equals input dot next line. If tailgate dot lowercase dot starts with Y, set unnecessary tailgate to true. Else if tailgate got two lowercase that starts with N, T dot set unnecessary tailgate to false. But you see, I have an error. That's because this method throws an exception. It throws that exception that we told it to do. We're throwing a new exception, right? And we're declaring it as such in the method signature. Hey, when you call this method, make sure you account for this exception, as it can occur. So what we need to do at this point is, we would need to provide the catch statement here. Catch exception EX system.out.println tailgate is unnecessary. Now, you will probably rarely use, well, you might, depending on how advanced you all get in your coding. You might, in this class, you won't throw exceptions. I won't require it. But you can. So depending on what your behavior is, you might want to throw an exception to anybody who's calling this method so that you force them to handle it. You force them to catch it. Right? And so if I run this, I want to add, is the tailgate necessary? I type a Y, no issues. Right? Do another add, I type an N. Now, if you remember, when unnecessary tailgate is false, we throw the exception. So when I type it in, it should throw the exception. The tailgate is unnecessary. So it threw a new exception. Inside of our lecture 11 class, we caught that exception down here and we said the tailgate is unnecessary. So you have a lot at your disposal to protect your program from undesired behaviors. I'm just showing you how, in some ways, to do that. Now, on your lab, you'll need to protect against number format exceptions, and I believe array out of index out of bounds exceptions. So I kind of gave you the code on how to do those. Of course, you can make your code more responsive by not having a large try-catch, but having individual try-catches for each case. The user can just, oh, you chose case 1, you made a mistake, you don't have to select case 1 again, you can just keep going with case 1. So that's up to you. All you have to do is make sure your code doesn't break when somebody puts in a character instead of a number, or an index that's outside the bounds of your arrays. That's all you will need to do for your lab and for your assignment. Any questions about exceptions, try-catches? If not, I will see you on Friday. Let me check your notes from Monday. The notes that you took on Monday. Did I check them already? Are they in the class? Okay. All right, then we're good.